Hey everybody, RPG here. Today we're going to do a full demo and review of the PowKiddy RGB10-Max 2 Handheld Video Game Console. So we're going to take a closer look at the console, go over the design here as well as the functions and features of the handheld. Then we're going to power this on, go through the operating system, check out a couple different collections, and dive into a few games so we can test out the performance. So let's get started. Alright, so let's open up our PowKiddy RGB10-Max. Alright, so taking a closer look at this handheld here, you can see that the first thing I notice, just picking it up and putting it in my hands, is the way that this is custom sculpted here. Really nicely tapered in, so it actually just sits perfectly in your hands. Now this is how I would be holding this. I have my button controls right here, D-pad here, and then obviously dual analog sticks right below. So this is the best way to hold this. My fingers, just without even thinking about the shoulder and trigger buttons up here, just automatically rest right here, with, again, just without even thinking. So it's really a natural way to hold on to this. I love the feel of this, and just taking a look at the back side here. This is actually custom sculpted right here as well. So when I'm holding this, let's see if I can get it from this angle here. That's how I hold it, and it gives my fingers here something to hold on to because it's notched out like this. So you can see on this end where it just kind of bubbles down like that. It just gives you something to kind of hold on to in here as well. So it's super, super stable. I really love the way that this feels. So let's dive in and take a look at the different functions and features here on this particular handheld. So we have our 4-button configuration here, A, B, X, and Y. Now it's really hard to actually see the letters here because they're white on white, so it really does get pretty washed out. But I think most of us that are familiar with gaming know exactly where our A, B, X, and Y buttons are located. So not much to see there, but it is really nice, nicely placed, and the action on these buttons, while I don't have this powered on yet, does seem to be quite good. They're popping right back up. I can feel them, you know, when I press them down, I can feel where they'd be registering. So I don't have any concerns. We're obviously going to power this on in a few seconds and test this out, but the action of the buttons does feel quite nice. Going over to the D-pad, typical cross D-pad here, but again, functionality and everything, really nice playability from what I can tell so far. I'm getting nice movement even when circling like this on there, which is always a good way to test this out. I really do think that this is going to be quite nice, and what I always look for on cross D-pads is your diagonal movement. So that would be going, you know, obviously between your up and down, I mean your up and right, or up and left, or down and left and down and right. So anywhere in here, I always look to feel that out and just see you know, how it feels, because a lot of these you pretty much get your up, down, left, and right movement, but the diagonal can be pretty restricted. So this one feels pretty loose, and I mean that in a good way. Loose means that I'd be able to register those diagonal movements without any issues. So super excited to test that out and see how it works, but so far so good. We have 2 buttons up here, which we could actually reprogram as our start and select. I do tend to do that with the PowKiddy RGB10 products, just because I find that hitting the start and select all the way down here can be a little bit of a strain. If I'm playing up here already for the majority of games, or even if I have one hand down here, I just find that this movement is much easier than, you know, if I'm playing up here and having to go down here to select. Maybe I'm playing a MAME game and I need to insert coins, I could drop in down here. It's all personal preference. I just find that my thumbs are typically up here, and this is just a more natural movement to me. But you can also use these for rewinding games, fast forwarding. So you can really customize these buttons up here however you want, but functionality of them seems to be all good. Same exact functionality as the start and select down here at the bottom. So let's take a look at the dual analog sticks here. So both analog sticks have nice movement. It is pretty tight, which is good. Tight is always good on analog sticks because you're going to get a really nice feel for steering on like racing games or any games where you're using these to move around. You don't want them to be super loose because then you have trouble actually controlling your character in games or your car or, you know, whatever you're doing in those games. I like them to be a little bit tighter just so you can feel them being, a little bit more responsive. So we also have the button function within. Now the button function doesn't get used a whole heck of a lot in emulation, or at least on emulation with games that would be used on the PowKiddy RGB10-Max 2 here, but it is always good to have those. There are some PlayStation games where you do utilize those, so always good to have. Now let's jump up to the top here. We have a bunch of different things going on in between here, but while we're talking about controls, let's go over our shoulder and trigger buttons. Obviously, we have our left shoulder right here, and our trigger buttons. So I want to talk about what I really pick up on here right off the bat when I hold these. The trigger buttons are sculpted really nicely. So I'm going to just turn it this way. I don't know if you can really see here. Maybe that's the best angle. Let me actually flip this so you can see a little contrast here. You can see that these are nicely sort of bended and sculpted this way. So it actually just grips your finger really nicely. So I'll show you right here. You can see my finger just fits right in the middle of this groove. So the function and the action rather on your trigger is perfect. They are slightly hinged. You can see how when it moves like this, this part here goes up and down. Obviously the hinge would be somewhere inside of there, but they're slightly hinged. Usually I don't like hinged buttons, but on here it does work really nicely, and they're, again, very slight. It's not an action where you really have to crank it down and bend it all the way back. It's just a slight touch there, so really nicely done there. Now I want to talk about the shoulder buttons here. Shoulder buttons I'm not as happy with. Just, again, I haven't powered this on, haven't tested it out yet, but I'm just checking the functionality and action on buttons. When I go to the shoulder buttons here, first off, let me show you where my fingers line up. They pass by the shoulder buttons by a pretty good distance. I don't have massive hands, but obviously my fingertips are up here, nowhere near where the button functionality would be. That's not the end of the world though, because we have the inside of our fingers. We can hit it this way, or we can always adjust our grip to be out here. Though I don't really like a grip where you're not holding onto the handheld tightly, but not the end of the world. Where I find the sweet spot to be with these shoulder buttons though is down here. So I'm going to just show you guys using the same motion with my finger and just tapping at different spots, and you'll be able to hear where it works best. So here in the center, a little bit of a strain to actually register that. Up here at the top, which is closer to where my fingers would be. If my fingers are here as I'm holding it and I slid them over, it would be right here. That's a pretty major strain to register the buttons there. You can hear it. You can see the whole handheld kind of shaking as I hit those, just because I am actually straining to make that register. So the sweet spot's actually down here. So I'm going to show you guys the same thing. See how much faster I can do that? And again, I'm trying to go fast here, but it's not registering. So the sweet spot's here, and if we look closer here, you can see it's raised up a little bit more. Where it's raised up is where you're going to get the most action. So that's kind of a weird spot for this to be. If I'm out here playing, I really have to change the entire way that I hold this handheld if I'm playing a game where I'm using a lot of the shoulder button functions. Again, works really nicely there, but up here, it's not terrible, but it's not as free as down here. So that's just the first thing that I pick up on here. We're obviously going to jump into some games. We're going to test them out because I definitely want to see how they work. Maybe I'm just diving too far into it, but I always check the functionality of buttons without even powering this on, because I always get a good idea, where I need to look closer once I get into an actual game. So enough about shoulder buttons. Let's jump up here to the top. So we have our power button over here all the way on the left, followed by our reset button. Reset button is recessed in, which is always good because we don't want to accidentally hit that at any point. Otherwise it's going to totally reset our entire system here. Right here we have a little toggle switch for Wi-Fi to turn it on or off. Comes on off by default. Here we have our OC 5 volt. Is it 5 volt? Yeah, 5 volt right here. We have our headphone jack right here, and then we have an OTG right here, and then we have our SD card slot. So it comes with an SD card in here. I'm going to check. I assume it's a 32 gigabyte. Oh no, 64 gigabyte. So that's cool. There's actually a lot of games on here, but we'll get into that in a second. So what I really like about this is you don't have to get like a pen or anything like that to engage this or disengage this to, eject the actual SD card. A lot of handhelds, they sink in there quite a bit, which is good, I suppose, because you don't run the risk of accidentally hitting it. Now I said that and I can't get it back in, but I also have no fingernails too, so it did go in there. I like when I don't have to go fish out a pen or something to, just eject this. It's just so much easier when you can just, press it. You don't want it to be easy, super easy to eject, but at the same time, I don't want to have to search for a pen or a pointy object to disengage that. So I do like the way this is set up. It is really nicely done, and it is totally flush when it's fully inserted. So there's no risk of accidentally popping that out while you have the actual console powered on. So over here now we have our volume controls up and down. Always like having volume controls available somewhere on the outside of the handheld so we don't have to go into settings and adjust that way. I have seen some with like little switches or toggles on the sides. I don't like those because of how you actually hold this. So I do really like the fact that they're placed up here where there's no risk of actually adjusting the volume while playing a game, accidentally or anything like that. So that's pretty much it in terms of the different functions and features on here. You can see the back side. I'll show you so you can actually see it. It's just says PowKiddy RGB10-Max 2. Has some battery information there, adapter input. That's pretty much it. We've covered everything on here. So we're going to power this on now and take a closer look at the operating system, collections, and the games that are on the stock card that comes with the RGB10-Max 2 handheld console. All right, so let's power this on. We have our power button up here in the top left corner. We're just going to hold that down for about 3 seconds or so. Hard kernel is going to pop up here on the first screen, and we're going to let this fully boot up. So it's got the Emulator operating system on here, which is a good one. I do enjoy using that particular OS. So let's let this boot up and let's take a look around. All right, so really nice layout right off the bat here. You can see we have our arcade classics. We have MAME, Atari, WonderSwan Color, Capcom 1, 2, and 3. And you can see right below it, we have the game count right below. So right here we have our Final Burn, 915 games, MSX, 564 games, PC Engine, 94 games. This says CD-ROM, so that's probably Sega, I'm guessing, 1 game, N64 80 games, Nintendo 3,892 games. Now, before we move on, I want to just show you this because you're probably thinking, hey, they didn't make that many games for the Nintendo Entertainment System. So let's jump into it. It's actually sectioned off. So we have an alternative folder, we have a FC Classic, and we have a top 100, and then we also have hacks here. So if we jump into hacks, there's a ton of hacks on here, which is something we don't typically see on handhelds, not with the stock cards anyways. So that's a pretty cool little selection there. Gives you some added stuff that you probably haven't seen before. So I'm not going to dive too far into this one, but it is cool to know that they are on there. So I'm going to back out and we'll continue on. So we have our family computer, 713 games. Family computer disk system, 229 games. Game Boy, 4,546 games. Now, I'm not sure that they made that many games, so I'm assuming we probably have some hacks in here. We have some classic, collector's edition. Not sure what this is. It appears to be half in a different language, so yeah, I don't know. It might be like foreign releases because I'm seeing, yeah, Japanese version, USA, something else here. I don't know if it's going to scroll across. Pugsley's Amateur. Yeah, so yeah, a bunch of different versions on here. So that's pretty cool. That would account for why we have so many games in that collection. Game Boy Advance here, 1431. Game Boy Color, 3,705. So let's jump in there. Same thing. It's got that half translated, half in another language. I don't know if it's Chinese, Japanese, or what exactly that is there, but you know, a lot of different titles. We can see we have multiples of each one. European release, USA release. Might be some hacks in here, I'm not sure. So we'll continue on. We have Game Watch. Kind of weird that they have the movie background for the Grinch on that one. 52 games in Game Watch. What do we have here? Super Famicom, 348 games. Super Nintendo, 209. Virtual Boy, 15. Open Bore, 2 games. Let me see what they have for Open Bore. Okay, not familiar with those. 1 game here. We have some ports. We have some Neo Geo Pocket, Pocket Color, Genesis, 32X, 19 games. Dreamcast, 6 games. Game Gear, 303 games. Genesis, 662. Looks like no hacks in there. I was curious about that. Sega Master System. Let's see if there's any hacks in this one. Nope, doesn't look like it. Okay. Mega Drive, 1193. That's a pretty significant one. Naomi, we have some script setups here, so let's jump in there. That's not going to help us too much. Well, okay, Nintendo DS. So it just makes it easier where we could add some games in that way. Scum VM, and then no idea what these are. I'm sure we could figure it out if we spend some time on it. PlayStation, 7 games. PSP, 7 games. Pico B, which is, yeah, not a whole lot there. We have our all games. So it says 20,570 games on here. Now, that's a little deceiving. I mean, obviously they do have that many games on here, but they're mostly for collections that probably aren't the most popular collections. And as we saw when we jumped into some of these, there's a lot of duplicates. We were seeing in Game Boy, as well as some of the other collections that we jumped into. A lot of times there are 3 or 4 of the same title because they're counting USA release, European release. We saw some Japanese releases, and then we've seen some like custom stuff. So it seems like a lot of games on there, but realistically, I think it's kind of embellished. Not because there's not that many ROMs on here, but because there's so many ROMs that are duplicates. And then we also have duplicates because we're going to have a lot of the same games for multiple systems. Like, for example, you might have some Super Nintendo games that are also released on the Sega Genesis or stuff like that. You know, N64 may have a version, Dreamcast may have a version, and PlayStation may have a version of the same games. So we have to take that into consideration as to why we have so many games on here. But nonetheless, it is really a lot of different collections and a lot of game options on here, much more than we typically have had in the past with handhelds, especially from PowKiddy. They've always been very limited. So we have a favorites collection here where we can just add games to this list. So it comes with a list kind of already created for us, but we can easily remove these and add our own. So that's always fun. Now, I think I kind of skipped over the first couple of collections here. So for Arcade Classics, 178 games. MAME, we have 272 games and a very racy photo there. I will add that part to it. But we have an Atari, what is that, 2600? My eyesight's apparently not so good. Yeah, Atari 2600 there. And then I know we mentioned the Wonder Swans before, but 112 games, 141 games, Capcom 1, 32 games, Capcom 2, 37 games, 4 games for Capcom 3. All in all, I mean, Capcom 3 is a little lacking, but not a bad selection for these. Let's just jump in there and see what we have. So this isn't a great layout. You can see that we have numbers and abbreviations for these. So that kind of makes it a little bit of a challenge to figure out exactly what the heck the title is. We can obviously look over here. And with this particular collection, we do get a little video preview too. So that's cool to see. I'm not sure that they all have that. In fact, I know that they don't all have that. But let's jump into N64 too, because I'm interested to see if we have a video preview on these. Doesn't look like it. This is just going to be a still shot. Maybe a little box art in there for some. But definitely doesn't look like there's a video for these. Just going to let it sit for a couple seconds. Sometimes it takes a little while to load in, but no, it doesn't look like there's a video. So some have videos, some just have still shots. Let me jump in here. Let's go to the top 100. So this one's laid out. It's got the numbers and the titles, but the title seems to be a little bit more polished off than what we saw in Capcom. So the arcade ones usually seem to be kind of a mess. That's just typical for most handhelds. So just want to jump into another collection. Let's go into Super Nintendo. So this one also seems to be set up into 3 different folders. And this one's a little bit better with the layout, but This one doesn't seem to have any box art or anything like that. So each collection seems to be set up very differently. They don't have the exact same text layout. Some have video preview, some have just still shots, some have box art. It's just kind of all over the place, which, you know, it is what it is. Compared to some of the other handhelds that I've seen with the stock cards, this stock card seems to be the best so far, but still not super well polished. So we've seen what collections we have. We've seen the game lists, or game numbers rather. There's another somewhat racy photo there. It's kind of strange what they put on here, considering that some kids might be playing these, but is what it is there, I suppose. So let's jump into a couple different games. So let's see what PlayStation has, because it's not a super advanced list. Tekken 3 is one of my favorite games for PlayStation, so let's jump into Tekken 3 and test this out. So let's jump into Tekken 3 and test this out. You see that we have bezels by default. Now we can remove those. I know how to do that, so I do have a video on how to remove those. I'll put a link in the description of this video just in case you want to see. But some people like bezels, some people don't. Some games stretch really nicely to fit the entire screen, some don't. PlayStation usually does. Earlier releases, you tend to get pixelation and whatnot, so don't always recommend stretching, but certainly is an option. So let's jump into a quick arcade game, test out the performance. So with this one, I can use that shoulder button, which I'm dying to test out and see what the functionality is like there.
Round 1, fight!
So I am having trouble actually hitting that. So I have to really adjust and kind of hit it this way, which changes the overall way that I actually hold this entire side of the console. So let me try again. Yeah, it's not bad, the functionality there, but kind of testing out buttons, not really trying to play perfectly, but that should do a KO, and it does. All in all, the buttons and everything, like navigation, is great on here. I really do like the way that this is feeling. So I'm going to jump out of this title. Start and select is always going to enable your hotkey and get you in and out of titles, or not in and out, just out of titles. So let me back out here. PlayStation ran nicely. PSP. All right, so I want to check out PSP now. I'm not super familiar with these games that are on here, so let's go into Dynasty Warriors and just test out what the performance is like on here. When there's small collections, it usually is a good indicator that the collection probably doesn't have a whole lot of games that actually work on the handheld, which I know for a fact with the original RGB10-Max, PSP is kind of hit or miss. Some titles work, some don't. Majority don't perform super well, so my expectations aren't super high here. I'm getting a little like audio that's not perfect, but I'm really not familiar with this game at all, so I really don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing in here, but I'm just looking at movement more than anything. And in terms of like gameplay and buttons, I'm just like mashing buttons to try to get to the next screen, because I really have no idea how this game works. Seem to be doing the same thing over and over. That movement's actually quite nice here. There's no lags or delays or anything like that. I wish I could do like some fighting and test out movement that way, but okay, good. But yeah, the movement is spot on. Audio's a little gargled a little bit, but not terrible. Yeah, a little laggy there. So I can definitely see that this is going to, see how he's kind of running a little bit in slow motion now. It was really quick before. So that's an indication that we're probably going, yeah, now over here he's running much faster and smoother. See the movement here, and then let me go over there. See if it does it again. Yeah, it's like slow motion here. So that's not a good sign. But really what I kind of expected here. So let's jump out of this game. Sorry, I'm not familiar with that title, so I'm actually not familiar with any of these PSP titles, so I'm not going to be able to really demo those games well for you. But let's back out, and let's go into like a MAME game. I like the 1942 or 43s. I think that they're good ways to test this because they're kind of fast moving, and I don't anticipate any issues with MAME, but let's test it out and see what we have in here. These are classic games. With the older games, you really don't run into issues too often on handhelds or any console, really. Everything usually emulates these quite well. Seems to be kind of a slower start to this game. I wonder if it's maybe not a good ROM. You can see I have the little blinking line up here in the top left corner. I know it's a little bit hard with the reflection on here. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so should be able to add coins. Really large bezels on here, which I'm not crazy about. We should be able to stretch this though if we wanted to. This was probably that thinner arcade, so it makes sense. Alright, so I'm not doing well, but not super smooth in terms of like the shooting. I know I'm not doing well at all in this game, but when I'm tapping the button, I'm noticing, and it could just be this game, but I'm noticing that it's kind of inconsistent in terms of the shots. You can notice that on the screen. So I'm going to show you guys again. See how there's a lag in there? I'm hitting it the same way every time. I know I keep crashing, but hitting it the same way every time, and you'll notice that the bullets aren't the same consistency. It's not like a steady shot. So I'm just shooting. I'm not trying to actually play this, but so watch when I shoot. It's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Maybe that's the game, but I don't think so. Let me jump into the other one and see if it does that. And it could just be the settings on the actual card here. So if that's the case, which one do we go into? Do we go into 42 or 43? Let me see. I don't remember now. Let's go into this one and see if it's the exact same one. I don't think it was. So it could be the card and just, you know, the way that it's set up on here. Yeah, that's a different bezel. So this is the other one. So let me see if it happens on here. And the way the bezels are here, there's a decent amount of cutoff there. You can see where it should say push button, but it says push BU. And I'm totally off screen here. So the bezels look beautiful here. Yeah, this one's working much better. So it must just be that ROM. See how I'm tapping and it's a steady shot. The other one was really sporadic. It was doing like 3 and then a pause, 2 and then a pause. It wasn't consistent like this. So here I can kind of fly all over, but look when I go left, I'm totally off screen. So they made really nice bold bezels, but unfortunately they made it to like a 3:4 ratio. I'm just guessing on that, but I think it's a 3:4 ratio, which would account for why they've just cut it short. So I've seen enough here. I'm gonna jump out. Performance of the handheld though seems really quite nice. It's just the card that's not perfect. So I'm pretty confident that when I put in my RGB10 card that I've custom made, that I'm going to get much better performance from this. But this review is just on everything's stock here. I'm not going to be reviewing it with, you know, custom images that are, you know, just custom tailored to be max performance in every way. So let's go into now, we've jumped into some arcade. Let's go into, did we do N64? No, let's jump into N64. So N64 is a collection that's always hard to emulate, even on regular, like a Raspberry Pi 4. So I'm going to go into a collection, or a game rather, that's exceptionally hard to emulate. So I'm going to go into one of the cruising games. There's a lot of fast movement in these games, and usually you run into a lot of problems. So Cruis'n USA is the first release. You would think that that one would have the least amount of emulation problems, but I'll tell you firsthand, it actually has the most. So I think this would be a great way to test out the capabilities for N64. I have tested out Mario Kart. I'm not going to show that here. Everybody knows how Mario Kart performs for the most part. It does work quite well on here. So I want to try something that's a little bit more challenging. This game is going to give us a good indication of that. Screens so far are perfect. Let's go with the red. So there we go, some lags right there. Flickering screens, graphics are kind of going all over the place. It's exactly what I anticipated. Very familiar with this title and how it performs in emulation. So where are our buttons for this? That's changing. Let's see. And that's changing our view. So how the heck do we go forward? That's the brakes. You can see the taillights lighten up. Okay. Left shoulder is the gas. Really strange. But look at the performance on here. Very stuttery. I bet we don't get very far in this game at all. Oh yes, this is unplayable. Yep, awful. So this, again, could be the card, could be the console. We have to check this out. Because this is just terrible. Nobody's going to play a game like this. Let's back out of this. Let me just jump into one other N64 game here. Mario Kart 64. So this game is usually quite easy to emulate. Not that it always emulates well on some handhelds, but usually 9 times out of 10, you get through it just fine. So I'm just going to do the first race here. So I hit that up top here. It gave me a little bit of a strain just to hit it. Not that I'm fatigued in any way, but it's definitely not easy to hit that shoulder button. You really have to think about it and you know, click it. Where am I, up against the wall here? Okay, so how do I back out? Alright, so I think I'm just in a weird spot. I'm not going to hold that against the game here. Yeah, that was just me being in a weird spot. That does happen in this game, so don't hold that against the game. So let me show you how well this actually works when I use that shoulder button over here. It's just a simple tap, and boom, I'm able to use it perfectly. Now I'm going to get another one here. Let me show you up here. See, I hit it twice before it actually registered. That's because the best action, as I showed you before we even powered this on, is down here on the shoulder button. So we've seen enough here. Everything works beautifully on here. No issues with emulating this game whatsoever. Very smooth. So let's jump out. All right, so as you can see, we jumped in here. We took a closer look at the layout of this handheld, as well as the functions and features of the controls, and just the overall handheld itself. And everything on here works really nicely. I really like the layout. I like the way that it's custom sculpted to really fit in your hands beautifully. Super comfortable. All the functions here work great. I love the analog sticks. Steering in racing games is phenomenal. Great action on the analog sticks. It's a tight analog stick, so it's not overly loose. Loose analog sticks usually leave you prone to overcorrections when steering. That's an issue that I run into even on good analog sticks sometimes. But on here, I was pretty much on point. You can see that in Mario Kart. Obviously, the other racing game there, Cruis'n USA, was a complete bust. Weren't able to play that at all because it just lags out. Now that is pretty much on point with how it would be on the original RGB10-Max handheld as well. So, you know, they didn't change a whole lot here other than the actual layout in terms of the way that it's sculpted. But in terms of performance, it's right on point with how the original one was. I don't see any solid advancements in terms of performance in any way on here. But focusing on the controls, functionality is great on the buttons, great action on them. The only issue, as I mentioned multiple times in this video today, is that shoulder button. I don't like it. I don't like the fact that you have to. One of the best things about this handheld is the way that it sits in your hands, and the fact that you have to readjust that and come all the way out here to get a good function out of those shoulder buttons is pretty ridiculous. I think that, you know, the fact that, yes, you can hit it like this, but it doesn't register right. It doesn't function the way it should. Over here is the sweet spot. So if we have to play a game where we're using the shoulder buttons a lot and you're relying on those shoulder buttons, you have to really hold this kind of like this. It's not a great, like, solid hold on the handheld. It's not how I like to hold it. So that's a pretty decent issue here. You know, it's not a deal breaker. I think that the overall layout otherwise kind of makes up for it, but it depends on what type of games you're going to be playing. Are you playing a lot of games where you need that shoulder function? You could go in and probably remap the shoulder function to the trigger button, and then you would be in great shape. You know, if you're playing a lot of Super Nintendo, which does have shoulder buttons, you could remap it to the trigger button and be in much better shape, because the trigger button is phenomenal. Best trigger buttons that I've ever seen on a handheld. I love the way that they feel. I love the way they're sculpted to have that little channel that your finger sits inside of, and you can just hit, whether you hit here right on the seam, all the way over on this seam, or dead center. It functions the same throughout, which is how buttons should be. They should be totally functional based on wherever you hit them, because everybody has different size hands. The way that my hand fits on here isn't the way that your hand's necessarily going to fit on here. So we want to be able to utilize the functions on these buttons without having to strain to adjust our grip or anything like that. So the other thing about the trigger buttons is they're kind of on a hinge, which I usually don't like, but the hinge is so slight that the movement is really precise. So I do like that. Now, in terms of the controls at the top, everything for the most part there is pretty much exactly the same as it was on the original RGB10-Max. So I liked everything on there. I like everything on here. No issues whatsoever there. So that's pretty much it in terms of the controls. So let's jump into the performance. Before I dive into the performance though, I want to mention that the cards that come with handhelds, and it doesn't matter if it's PowKiddy or any other brands out there, the SD cards that come stock in these handhelds is usually garbage. Now, this is probably the best SD card I've seen that comes stock with a handheld. The collections are really nice on here. It has a lot of games on here. Most of them work really well. Now, I know I didn't jump into a whole lot of them here in this video today, and I apologize. I jumped into mostly challenging games that were going to stress the system, and I did that intentionally because I want to know the flaws. I know that if we play Sonic on here, it's going to work perfectly. I know if we play older arcade games, they're going to work perfectly. We did jump into 1942 and 1943, and we did see some issues with the buttons where, well, not so much the buttons, but the functions of the buttons in the game, where we're noticing lags in that one version. The other version was perfectly fine. We're going to see issues like that here and there. We don't want to see it too often, and I do attribute that mostly to the card. The card isn't set up to have optimal performance, like if you went in and did a custom card. Custom cards are always going to be way better, plus they're usually done on branded cards. These are generic cards that are super prone to corruptions. SD cards in general are prone to corruptions, but non-name brand ones, you're almost 100% going to run into a corruption, and it's usually going to be sooner rather than later. So even if you use the exact same card, flashing it over to a Samsung or a SanDisk card is going to put you in much better hands, and you're going to run into a lot less issues that way. But I would recommend going in and customizing the card, building your own or buying a preloaded one that's already been optimized, because this as it is pretty much you take a ROM, you drop it in there. It's not going to have maximum performance. So, you know, you will run into issues here and there, but for the most part, games do run well on here. Now, your limitations are going to be in line with the original RGB10-Max. They did go in here and change a few things, but it's mostly cosmetic. It's mostly with the layout here. The custom sculpted edging, the buttons are a little bit different. It's less square than the original one, and I'm actually going to do a comparison video between the original one and the two here. So when I do that, there'll be a link in the description of this video. I haven't done it yet, so you know, if you check back on here, you know, a week after this one gets loaded in to YouTube, then you'll probably be able to find it on there. But in terms of that, there isn't a whole lot of difference between the two handhelds, other than cosmetically and of course the way that it feels in your hands and all of that stuff. The performance is exactly the same. So jumping into N64 games, hit or miss. You're going to get some games that work beautifully, like Mario Kart ran really nicely. You're going to get games that don't run at all. That's N64 emulation, even on, you know, like a Raspberry Pi 4. Some games work, some games don't. So with handhelds, you're going to have more games that don't work, but don't buy this if you're looking for N64, Dreamcast, or PSP. These are going to be collections that are really hit or miss. You're going to get into probably 50% of most of these collections, in all honesty. Maybe 70% in some cases, but I think it's really closer to that 50% mark. So don't get this if that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for older collections like MAME, Classic Arcade, Sega Genesis, PlayStation works really nicely on here, Super Nintendo, all that stuff runs super well. So get it for that reason. Don't get it because you want the higher end systems, because this is just not going to do it for you. So that's pretty much it in terms of the performance. It's really right in line with the original one. I wish I could tell you that they went in and they totally changed it and now you could play, you know, N64, Dreamcast, and PSP flawlessly. That's not the case. It's still going to be dicey. It's still going to be hit or miss in those collections. PlayStation, though, does run really smooth. It did on the original one too, though. So the major difference here from this to the original RGB10-Max is purely cosmetic. Inside, no difference whatsoever. I don't know if they're advertising a difference inside. In all honesty, I'm not sure. If they are, there's no difference inside. You're getting into the same collections the exact same way. Performance is level between the two devices. So the screen does look slightly better than the original one, and it's slight. Not a whole lot better in all honesty, but slightly better, slightly. Audio, pretty much the same. Controls, pretty much the same. I liked them on the original one. Maybe the analog sticks are slightly better here. It could just be that I have a fresh one versus a broken in one too, so that could be a factor. But the triggers on here are much better than the original because this is rounded off versus being squared off. So I do like that better, but the shoulder buttons, no good. So that's pretty much it in terms of my experience here. What I like, what I don't like about this particular handheld. Now, I would still recommend it, but I wouldn't recommend it if you already have the original Max. If you have the RGB10-Max, this is not really going to make enough of a difference where I think you should buy this as well. If you haven't bought the original one, then go with this one because of the way that it's laid out and sculpted to fit your hand better. But other than that, not a whole lot of reason to go pick this up if you already have the original. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you guys so much for giving me your time and hearing me out about my experience here with the RGB10-Max 2. Let me know what you guys think about it. If you haven't yet subscribed to the RetroPie Guy YouTube channel, I strongly recommend doing that because we do a ton of videos on here based around retro gaming. We do product reviews like this, tutorials, gameplay demos. We have the Forgotten Favorites YouTube series every Monday and Thursday night. Ton of stuff to see on here. Best way to stay in the loop is hitting that subscribe button. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you guys so much. Until next time, I'm RetroPie Guy.